Hello, cellists of YouTube. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to talk about a really important topic, and that is practicing, and much more precisely, what constitutes and what doesn't constitute good practice. If you had asked my 15 or for that matter even my 20-year-old self what constitutes good practice, I would have probably told you lots and lots of hours. And indeed, oh my God, I put the hours in, and I did a lot of hours of spectacularly bad practice. And the funny thing is, when I now talk to my colleagues, most of them all say exactly the same. We all collectively cringe at how many hours we wasted, as children, as teenagers, even as college students, wasting hours and hours and hours doing really, really, really bad practice. So practicing is definitely an art that needs to be taught, that needs to be learned. And today we are going to look in a bit more detail at what good practice should look like. The first thing to say is that quality of practice trumps quantity of practice any day of the week. I never say to my students, I want you to do, 2, 3, 4 hours of practice, because for me that is a completely wrong parameter to set. Of course, it goes without saying that the more material you need to cover, the more time you will have to put in, but time can never be the starting point. Of course, some tasks will take longer than others, but starting with time, for me, simply sets the wrong framework, because I find now, obviously, I don't have anywhere near the amount of hours to practice that I had when I was a student. I'm now having to juggle concerts, rehearsals, teaching, making videos, and obviously general life and lots of other things, and still find the time that I need to prepare, for concerts, learn a new repertoire, generally keep my playing in shape. So the amount of time I get to practice nowadays really varies quite wildly. Yeah, if I have a complete day off at home, which happens very, very rarely, I might, get the luxury of practicing, 4 or 5 or 6 hours. But more often than not, I'm having to squeeze in 20 minutes here, half an hour there, 10 minutes before a rehearsal starts, just to, I might have my iPad on the stand and look at, something I have to do next week or next month or something. And it's now much more sort of bite-sized chunks. So I have to be extremely organized in how I structure my practicing. And that really leads me to my first point, and that is planning. Planning is extremely important in practice. I try to, as much as possible, always I'll usually write a note somewhere either on a piece of paper or on my phone or somewhere, to say, okay, those are the things I have to cover tomorrow. Those are the things I need to particularly look at. Those are the things I'm trying to achieve. And I find it's very, very, very important to do that before you go anywhere near the instrument. Because like it or not, the moment we start taking out the instrument and start playing, the rational tends to go a little bit out of the window and the emotional takes over. You know, oh yeah, I really like playing that nice tune, and you know, I'd rather not deal with this bit that's, you know, I know, you know, wasn't in tune yesterday. And you know, so it's really, really important that we make our practice planning with a very cool head, and preferably away from the instrument. So what should the practice plan entail? Of course, that depends entirely what stage, you know, of your cellistic journey you're on. It depends entirely how many things you've got to cover at a time. But I would say, as a rough guide, there are certain fundamentals that have to be covered every single day. So I always compare this a little bit when you look at ballet dancers. When you go, I live in London, so for me it's, you know, the Royal Opera House. If you go there at 10 o'clock in the morning into the ballet rooms, you will find the entire company doing a class in the morning, no matter whether you're the most senior principal or the most junior member of the corps de ballet. Every single person will be at the bar training the absolute basics over and over and over again. Why? Because that's how you stay in shape. That's how you maintain a high standard. So that is incredibly important. For me, those basics, the one that, it doesn't matter if I only have 1 minute or 2 minutes to do it, to warm up, I need to play open strings. I need to get my sound production set, get that correct feeling in the right arm. Then of course I'll want to do some very slow shifting work, and that can be done obviously on scales, on arpeggios, on many other things, but I want to have that quality time just, again, training those movements over and over and over again in a really sort of calm and controlled way. I usually try to have some time on vibrato, on different speeds, controlling that. And then there will always be, depending on what I feel sort of my playing needs, yeah, I might find that you know, I really need to spend more time, you know, training, let's say, octaves or other double stops or certain bow strokes. So always try to include in your practice, dedicate some time towards something which you know is a bit of a weakness, either generally or just at that point, something that has gone a little bit out of shape. So that's very important, you know, the sort of knowing, being very honest with yourself and knowing, okay, this is something I really need to devote extra time to at this point. And then obviously, you know, you might be working on, a piece, you might be working on a study, or, you know, anything else. try to plan exactly. The worst thing you can do is just play the whole thing over and over from beginning to end and hope that magically it will improve, because it absolutely will not if you do that. So plan exactly which section of the piece are you going to work on. What aspect of that section are you going to be working on? Are you going to be just doing, you know, very slow practice, just cleaning up intonation? Are you going to be focusing on, I don't know, the right hand, the bow stroke, the string crossings? So that is really, really, really important. Have a firm plan. My second point is perhaps the most important one of all, and that is that practice is only practice when it's done very consciously and with a great deal of awareness. And that is not always a given at all, because it's very, very, very easy when we've been especially sort of playing for a little while, that we really sort of go into autopilot, and, you know, our hands are moving, but in reality we're thinking about, you know, what I need to buy at the supermarket later, or which bills I have to pay, or you know, all sorts of other things. The mind starts to drift. That is human. That is totally normal. Now, how do we combat that? And again, that slightly comes back to the first point, that of planning. The more we have set very, very, very narrowly defined parameters for what we are trying to achieve, what we are trying to focus on, the easier it is to stay on track. Yeah, you've probably heard about this concept of flow, yeah, which was developed by the Hungarian, I believe, psychologist Csikszentmihalyi, who came up with this concept that, you know, flow is the state when we're so absorbed in the task, that we're doing, so focused on it, that we pretty much sort of forget everything else around us. And of course, that's a sort of, you know, gold standard we kind of aim for in practice, and it doesn't sort of always happen automatically, but I find it's much easier to get there if we really know exactly what it is we are trying to achieve. And it's so important that when we are practicing, all our senses, but of course above all else, you know, our ears have to be in this constant state of monitoring. Yeah, a little bit, you know, like sort of instruments or gauges, you know, on a machine somewhere that, you know, constantly tell us, you know, okay, is that note in tune? Is that what I'm after? Am I, you know, using the right amount of bow? All of those things. So that is also something that takes time to develop. And if you've watched, you know, any of my other videos, you know, you will have seen that all the sort of advice and instructions I give, you know, are usually very, very, very precise in terms of exactly what I want you to look for. Because by cutting out what I would call a sort of coasting in practice, you know, of just sort of playing, but, you know, without any sort of great sense of purpose or what we're trying to achieve, we can make a phenomenal amount of progress in far, far less time than we might think it takes. So that's very important. Awareness, monitoring, constantly listening, and listening very, very actively. And listening very, very actively also means listening quite critically. And really, I always say to my students, I want your ears to be in control mode, in checking mode. Yeah. So always questioning, is that note in tune? Is it really in tune? Is that exactly what I'm after? And I try to, with my students, really sort of hone these senses very, 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 very early on in their learning process, because I find the sooner, if we're already learning this process, especially as children, then the learning curve will be so much faster. Another thing which I really try to instill in my students very early on is a love for detail. And the idea is that if you're really fussing and caring about the small things, then the bigger picture will take care of itself. Yeah. If in our practice we adopt an attitude of sort of, near enough is good enough, it's sort of in tune-ish, it's almost rhythmical, no, it's not quite, but it'll do, then that's the result you're going to get. Whereas if we really, right from the outset, we're trying to in our practice really, really, really focus on doing small things really well, really caring about which part of the bow we're in, really caring that things are in tune, being really precise with the rhythm, making sure those string crossings are really smooth, then that will straight away set you on a completely different path. And whilst initially that may be very, 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 very tedious, and I certainly find with my students that takes quite a bit of sort of cajoling to instill that habit, the rewards come quite quickly. And as soon as people actually start to realize, just even at a fairly early stage, how nice things are starting to sound because we have taken care of every single little detail, that's usually the point when everyone buys into it, because it's so incredibly rewarding. Yeah, you may have all heard the saying, we are what we do, repeatedly. Yeah, so the idea that in the end, excellence really kind of becomes a lifestyle. Yeah, it becomes a habit. So and if you try to incorporate that in your practice very, 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 very early on, you will find that playing the cello becomes so much more fun and so much more rewarding. Of course, Another really important aspect is evaluating our practice, evaluating our progress. And that really goes hand in hand with monitoring that I just spoke about. But evaluating, I would say, is a sort of slightly more longer term thing. Both, you can evaluate in the short term, sort of after each practice session, and see, okay, if you go back to the plan that you made initially, did I achieve the goals that I set out, to achieve today? And you will find that some days you do, some days you don't. And if for whatever reason you didn't, always really important to look into, why? What are the sticking points? Why is this still not working? And it's really important to say that if you realize either straight away while you're practicing or afterwards that something isn't coming on the way you want to, that's always a bit of a red flag. So that's always a point really when you need to look at the process that you're using. Sometimes it can be very helpful in that case to record, especially on video, and see, because sometimes between what we are doing and what we think we're doing and what we are doing, there can be quite a big discrepancy, and that I'm speaking for myself here. So you can have a look on my channel. I made another video a few years ago where I think it's called the camera, something like the microphone and the camera are your friend. So use recording quite frequently. If you're not used to it, it will be, I don't want to use the word depressing, but it will certainly be revealing to start with, because even for me now, I can't really look at anything I record without going, oh, God, so that is totally normal, but it's very, very healthy, because it really shows that these sort of discrepancies between what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing. So and I also find it very helpful to keep, even though if we're all tempted to just record something and delete, try to hang on to some of those recordings, because they are very, very, very good indicator of longer term process. So with my students, periodically you sort of record them playing things, and I have a sort of little folder on my phone where I keep those, and sometimes sort of maybe 3 months later or 6 months later or so, I will do it again, and then I'll show them the old recordings and say, actually, can you see how big the difference is now? Because for us, day to day, it's very, very, very difficult to actually appreciate our own progress. So always evaluate both day to day in your practice, but also sort of in the medium and long term. Lastly, of course, there is no way around the fact that mastering or coming even anywhere close to mastering any instrument is a lifelong task. I don't think even amongst the very greatest musicians you will find anyone who will say, I've mastered it. For us cellists, the very famous Pablo Casals, he was still practicing daily in his 90s, and when somebody asked him why, his answer was, because I think I'm making progress. And that is exactly the right attitude. We will never be done practicing, and it can at many points been intensely frustrating process, because there are so many aspects of sort of learning to play the cello that simply take a lot of time. And there are, there's no way around it. In order to get to a level where you really enjoy playing the instrument, it takes an awful lot of what I call donkey work. Just really, really focused, repetitive work, essentially drilling certain technical processes. And I know that actually quite a lot of teachers shy away from not only saying that, but also really sort of doing that in a very structured way in their teaching, because everyone's worried about putting people off, or not inspiring people enough. But ultimately, building what I call this really, really big toolkit of technical skills is what ultimately allows us to be as free as we want to be, and to express ourselves exactly in the way we want to. So that's why everything I said earlier about, really fussing over detail, really building that sort of love for process, for me is so important, because the fun starts when you really feel that you are in control of the instrument. And for me, all these sort of hours of donkey work are really, really worth it for the freedom that mastering those processes ultimately gives me as a musician. So of course, if you are following my channel, if you are watching my videos regularly, you will already have developed a great love and appreciation for process and for donkey work. But I just wanted to say that, because as I said in other videos, what's very important in teaching is expectation management. And I think it's really, really, really valuable for any students to know that that is what is involved. And ultimately, talent is talent. It's when all is said and done, actually fairly small component of success. The biggest part ultimately will always be really, really, really diligent day-to-day work, practice that is very well structured, very conscious, and that for me is a practice that gives me the most satisfaction. Yeah, so at that point, I'm going to say happy practicing. And as usual, if you have any questions, if you want to chat about any of this further, leave a comment below. And as usual, if you enjoy these videos and you haven't done so already, smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, and I'll be back in a few days for more. Cheerio!